roots really go back to, I would say, 1963, and to some extent back to 1927. And I'll explain how we have these different roots and why one is 27 and one is 63. But let me start with 1962. In New Haven during the 50s and the 60s, urban redevelopment was a very big thing. And we had a mayor in New Haven, Richard C. Lee, who was mayor for many years and really was one of the national leaders in the whole field of urban redevelopment. He had a redevelopment team headed by Ed Logue, who was nationally famous and went to Boston after New Haven, went to New York after Boston. But as a team, they were able to get all kinds of federal assistance and money in an effort to redevelop New Haven. And an enormous amount of work was done, and neighborhoods were removed, people were relocated, a lot of new buildings were erected, the landscape in New Haven changed dramatically, but there was a concern at that time and for some time about what's happening to the people. While all this urban renewal is going on, where are the people going and what's happening to these low-income neighborhoods that were sort of vital prior to being destroyed? Where are those people going and what's happening on the human scale? And in 1962, the Ford Foundation got very much interested in this problem and decided it was going to spend money on what they called human renewal as opposed to urban renewal. This was the counterpart to deal with the other part of the problem, what was happening to the people. And so they funded programs in several parts of the country. There are a total of about 5 programs. New York had one, Boston had one, Washington, D.C. had one. There was one out in California. I'm not sure where the 5th was, but there were 5 of these programs. In New Haven, that program was called Community Progress, Inc. And the goal of the program was to create a catalytic organization that would have a dramatic effect on social service agencies in the community, in a sense of improving the quality of their work, enlarging the scope of their work, and making them more responsive to people and to the clientele that they were supposed to serve. The program itself was not essentially designed to be a service provider, but it was designed to change the mechanisms of many service providers and to enlarge and improve them. Although, in fact, it did both. It provided service and was very much involved in trying to improve social service agencies. At the time that that organization, Community Progress, Inc., was being created, there was a member of the faculty at the Yale Law School who was a Ford Foundation consultant, and his name was Joe Goldstein. He was a teacher of mine, a mentor of mine, a very good friend of mine, and they turned to him, the Ford Foundation did, and asked him for advice and input on this new entity, Community Progress, Inc. Joe Goldstein was not only a law professor, but he was a psychoanalyst, a practicing psychoanalyst. And having looked at the plan, he said, there are 2 thoughts that I have about things that I think ought to be included. One is we ought to provide a psychoanalytic opportunity, a training opportunity for grade school teachers to help them hopefully become more effective, more responsive to children that they're teaching. And the other plan that he had was we ought to have lawyers out in the neighborhoods with this Community Progress Inc., because Community Progress was going to have neighborhood offices, and he thought it would be good to have lawyers out there so that they could find out what's going on in terms of the legal needs of poor people and what they think ought to be done to try and address those needs. So Ford was impressed with these ideas and went to the person who had been designated to run Community Progress, Inc., and that was Michael Sverdlov, who was a good friend of the mayor, and the mayor and Ford and Svirdov had been very much involved together in sort of designing and developing this program. And so Ford went to Svirdov and said, we've consulted with one of our consultants, and we have a couple of proposals. And explained the proposals to Mike Svirdov. And Mike did not like either of them and rejected them both. And Ford said, if you're going to go ahead with this program at all, you've got to accept one of these proposals. And Svirdov's response was, as much as I dislike lawyers, and I do, I dislike psychoanalysts even more. So I'll take the lawyer program. And that's how it started, that we had neighborhood lawyers in New Haven as a result of the Svirdov decision, all of which was initiated by Joe Goldstein, who remained very close to the program over the years, was really a guiding force and a mentor to many of us. So in January '63, this community progress program started. And I was one of the first lawyers in it. Gene Kahn was the second. The two of us started out January 2, 1963, each in a separate neighborhood office. I was out in Worcester Square in the Conti School. Gene was out in the Dixwell area in the Winchester School. We were brand new. I had just graduated from law school about a year or so before. I had not been to court. We didn't think it was necessary for us to have been in court. I remember Gene coming to me before we started and saying, Frank, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? And I said, well, we'll just play it by ear, see what happens, and we'll handle it as things come up. There'll be people we can talk to, and we can consult. And I was young and perhaps foolish, but full of energy, and it was a very exciting kind of project. And so we joined on, and we started. Our role at the beginning was to sort of observe, see what kinds of problems were coming into the office, what kinds of concerns people had, and then discuss them and see what we could think of might be appropriate agencies that could be tapped into to provide service, or whether new agencies were needed. But we were really observers and in a way, referral people, or people who were seeking to solve problems in an innovative, creative way, because there were a lot of problems that had a legal dimension that didn't really seem to have a place for resolution. There was not much available. There was a legal aid bureau available at the time, which had a part-time attorney in charge of that bureau, and about 50 students working there from the Yale Law School on a semester-by-semester basis. But it didn't do litigation, and it really did not have the resources to provide the needs that people that we saw in the community needed. What happened very shortly after we started was that people, realizing that we were there, came to us with problems. And we, as I said, were both looking at problems in terms of what are larger solutions that may be available, where are referral agencies that might be available, or what, if anything, can we do? One of the problems that I got involved in at one point was a juvenile delinquency matter where the mother came to me saying that her son had not come home. She didn't know where he was, but he had been with some other kids, and they thought that he had been arrested. And what could I do? So we went down to the police station, and there was a juvenile division of the police department. They were holding this boy, and I think he was maybe 12 or 13, I don't know what his age was. But they were holding him for interrogation. And the mother asked me to intercede on her behalf and to speak to them and to get him out. So I said, I'm the boy's attorney. The mother has asked me to come here. I want to speak to the boy. Well, they weren't used to this. This was something new, and this was all before in re Gauld had ever been heard or decided. Children didn't have any rights. Delinquency cases were treated as civil matters. The juvenile court and perhaps the police as well were acting in parens patriae, in place of the parents, not as prosecutors, but as parents looking after the best interests of the children. So who was I, the attorney, to be coming in and interfering with this parens patriae arrangement that the police had with the child? But not knowing any better, I proceeded ahead anyway, and I met with the child, and I said, look, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to say anything to police. My advice to you is not to say anything, and we'll see if we can get you released. But do not say anything. Well, I was able to talk to the child maybe for 3 or 4 minutes at the most, and they were at the door coming in. I had to leave. And I said, no, I want to talk to my client. I want to stay with my client because I want to see that he gets released and is able to go home. No, they said, coming in and coming toward me, you have to leave. And I said, well, not knowing what else to say, I said, well, if what you're saying is you're going to physically remove me if I don't leave, then I'll leave. So I left. And I said to him as I'm leaving, now remember, you don't have to say anything to the police. Don't say anything. They didn't take that as being particularly helpful for the rehabilitation of this child. They thought it was overly confrontational. The child ultimately got released to the mother and was treated as in the system as a delinquent. We did not represent the child further. That's the extent of my involvement in that. We had another case that came up in the other neighborhood that Jean Kahn was involved in, involving a rape in which a African-American young man was being charged with the rape of a white woman. He was being represented by the public defender, but the mother of the man was not comfortable with the public defender system. And she wanted Jean Kahn, who was our attorney in the Dixwell neighborhood, who was a black woman, to be there at the council table and to be with the public defender. And although she did not appear in the case, and we were not going to litigate really any cases at the moment because we were not in a position to do that, but she was there at the council table to give some support to the accused just by being there as at the request of the mother. Well, the newspapers picked this up and made a cause célèbre out of it. What was this social service agency that had just been created, funded by Ford, outsiders, with their outside money, doing, being involved in a case like this? It was inappropriate. And CPI didn't have any business being in this case. It was not part of the overall plan for the neighborhood lawyers to be doing this. So there was enormous criticism, but much of it was coming from the press. Dick Lee, who was very, very politically sensitive, did not like criticism at all. He came down hard on Mike Svierdorf about what the hell we were doing in the criminal court when there's a public defender in the case, and that was not to be an intended, or was not an intended part of our role. So Svierdorf, who was running the program at that point with his concerns, and especially this particular concern, about our being involved in individual cases and advocating for the rights of individuals when that meant going up against an agency that CPI was trying to negotiate with, work with on a much more cordial, genteel kind of fashion than confrontation and advocacy, that what we were doing seemed to be working at cross purposes with what he was talking about and what he was trying to do. So he didn't see how this legal services dimension to his program could work at all. And in 2 months' time, after we started in January 1963, the program, the neighborhood lawyer program, came to a halt. It stopped. We were put on a very short leash, and we had to redesign or come up with a way to redesign the program. Jean left actually maybe 2 weeks after that, sometime in mid-March. She just left the program because she didn't want to be involved in the continuing hassle of this problem. What we did was we created a committee, a new committee, a legal advisory committee of lawyers in town who were sympathetic to the cause of providing legal services to poor people. That would be a guiding kind of committee for Mike Svierdorf so that he would have a sense of what the legal community thought was appropriate or inappropriate, because he just felt totally at sea and somewhat overwhelmed by lawyers on one side advocating one kind of a policy and no lawyers on his side. He hired himself a lawyer right away, and we had a group of people who were now part of this advisory committee. Well, that was the beginning. It really lasted two and a half months before it came to a halt. And it was part of the kind of the turmoil that legal aid in New Haven has had sort of from the beginning, from time to time. I mean, it varies in intensity and it's sort of cyclical, but it has been part of our history. Now, despite all of this, the Ford Foundation thought this was fascinating. This was a fascinating development from their point of view because it told them two things. One, there's a real need here for legal services for poor people. People want to use these services. There's a lot of need. It's just not being met. We've got to do something about that. And the other thing that it told them was you can't really run this kind of a program under the umbrella of a larger social service program. It just doesn't fit. It doesn't mesh. The methods of proceeding are totally different. Confrontation and advocacy are quite different from negotiation and compromise and the kind of thing that Community Progress was trying to do with other agencies. So whereas we were somewhat stressed out and at constant loggerheads with Community Progress, Inc. and trying to develop a program that was going to be workable, the Ford Foundation thought this is a breakthrough. We have learned a lot and we can do something here. And what they ultimately agreed to do was to fund the spinning off of a new corporate entity, which was New Haven Legal Assistance Association. It spun off out of CPI and actually became incorporated in September 1964. So it took well over a year for it all to happen. But it stayed alive. The program continued on. I stayed with the program, although what I did was, because the mayor was feeling a lot of heat he felt as a result of what was happening, he was then inclined to give up the City Legal Aid Bureau, which was a city function and part of the ordinances of the city, to any new entity that was created if it would take it over, and he would be involved in helping fund that arrangement, and Ford was interested in that as well. So I became the director of the Municipal Legal Aid Bureau at that point, and we had some new commissioners appointed. And that that was sort of the counterpart to the creation of New Haven Legal Assistance, and ultimately in 1965 or